Okay, good. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. So over the break, I pouted to Susie, and she gave me an extra 5 or 10 minutes. So I'm just going to rush through this last little bit that I couldn't get through because I think it's important. Some of this I kind of, because I was bouncing around a little bit, not following my notes all that well, I did cover some of this stuff, so it shouldn't take too long. But I want to talk a little bit about, okay, now you get the grant. Now what do you do? So this is one of those things that I told you before is when you apply for a grant, you really do want to know what's on the back end of this, right? You want to know, okay, if I get the grant, what performance measures do I have to do, right? How often do I have to submit the performance measures? What process am I going to use to submit the performance measures? If you apply for a grant to the Department of Justice, for a lot of their grants, they have an entirely different system that I didn't even show you today. That's set aside. It's called the Performance Management Tool, PMT. And you have to set up a user ID, and it's just clunky, and you have to submit your performance measures in that system. And they've defined a whole bunch of performance measures for every program. And very often, those performance measures have nothing to do with what you're applying for. And so you end up, sometimes you just put in as, it's not a real heavy lift. If it doesn't relate to you, you put in an A or 0, but you still have to know kind of what you're getting into, what the deliverables are going to be, and you want to be prepared to meet those requirements. Because again, if you don't do what you said you were going to do, if you don't do what you agreed to, there's a process by which they can debar you or suspend you. And we've had agencies in the state who have had to go through this debarment process or suspension process. And the feds have to release you from that list, and they're not very responsive. So we've had agencies kind of on some ticky-tacky things even be suspended, and then it takes 3 or 4 years to get off of that suspension list. So you do not want to go on the suspension list. So very important that you know what you're getting into. All of us do contracting a little bit differently. We use DocuSign. Some folks are using their own grant management system. Some folks require a wet signature. Some folks require just you log into the system, you type your name, and you accept it that way. So it varies on how we notify you and how you accept the grants, but we all have a grant acceptance process. Almost all of the grants in this space, funding criminal justice programs, are reimbursement based. So for cities and counties and state agencies, probably not a real big deal until you get to the last month of the year. But if you're a nonprofit, this can be a big deal. And if you can't cash flow, we turn our claims around in, I don't know, 10 or 11 days typically. But some state agencies, it's 2 months before you get reimbursed for whatever it is you're submitting. So you need to know that. And if that's a problem for you, you might be able to talk to your grant manager. And some grants will allow for some upfront funding, at least on a limited basis to get you started. Ours, we can't do that. It's not an option for us. So you need to know that. You need to be able to cash flow it at the front end at least. Grant manuals. So we don't have a grant manual, but I know a lot of agencies do. They're really helpful. It's been on my to-do list for about 2 years, and it just keeps sliding down that list. But I think it's a great idea. We just haven't quite gotten to it. But if they have a grant manual, have it handy. It will answer most of your questions, and you won't have to spend time chasing down answers if it's in the manual. Grant contracts, we talked about that small print in the application process and looking for that small print in the RFP. When you receive the grant, usually that's when you're going to sign off on all of those grant conditions. The grants that we receive from the feds, Most of them have a minimum of 40 special conditions. Some of them have 60 plus special conditions. So you have this whole, litany of standard grant conditions, and then you have, in addition to that, special conditions that apply to each of these funding sources. Every one of those that we get, I pass every single one of them on to you folks. So if it applies to me, I'm passing it on to you, and you're signing for that. When you sign your contract, whether it's with me, the AG's office, GTSB, or CJJP, you're signing off on all that small print, and you should read it because you're accountable for all of those things that you signed off on. I talked about reporting already. Record keeping, this is also sort of an important issue. So the technical guidance for DOJ funds, so all the money we're dealing with, is you have to keep records for 3 years. That's the kind of short version of it. But the more technical version is you have to keep records for 3 years following the close of the grant and the close of the audit affected by that grant funding. 5 years. If you keep it for 5 years, you're good. So that's what we typically tell people is 5 years. And that's pretty broad across the board, 5 years of work. Sustainability. You want to impress grant reviewers? Write a grant application and do a good job talking about sustainability. That's an immediate indicator to me that you've thought about how important this grant is, and you're 4 years ahead thinking about, if they fund it and I can fund this thing for 4 years through this grant program, how am I going to keep it going? If you figure that out, I know that you're really serious about this. We'd love to see good sustainability plans. There are very few grants that require sustainability beyond your grant. So some of the COPS grants, the COPS officers grants, if you get a COP for, I don't remember what it is now, I think 3 years, then you have to keep that COP employed for 2 more years. If it's not exactly those time periods, it's close to that. And there aren't very many that require sort of this responsibility to continue the effort, but some do. And if they do, again, this is reading that small print. Boy, you want to know. And when your boss signs off on you getting the grant or applying for the grant, you want to make sure that they know that there's a commitment here, because otherwise you end up having to pay the money that you did receive back. Okay. What can you do to get better? In addition to all the other things we talked about today, I always tell people, volunteer to be a grant reviewer. Volunteer to be a grant reviewer in somebody else's program doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to just be what you're applying for. Volunteer to be a grant reviewer for the feds. They're always looking for grant reviewers. And guess what? Some people, sorry, I'm about to start coughing. Some agencies pay their grant reviewers. The feds pay pretty well. I think they pay $1,500, and you don't have to read that many grants. So volunteer to be a grant reviewer. It's a great exercise. You see a lot of approaches in how people write grants, and you get to experience the process by which your grant's going to be judged. We've talked a lot about reaching out to program managers. Grant writing trainings. There's some really good ones out there. I encourage you to take your grant writing training if you haven't already done it, or if you don't feel totally comfortable in writing the grants. They're all tailored specifically to writing grants and that narrative part for the most part. I think Michelle mentioned ask to see your review score sheets. For most of us, I think in this state at least, they're public record. So not only, I shouldn't say this because it's going to cause more work, but not only if you ask me to see your review sheets, you could also ask me to see somebody else's grant application and their review sheets. We try not to be too accommodating for that. We're very accommodating in sharing your reviewer sheets. If you forced us, we'd give them to you, but what you really want is your own, right? But having said that, if you want, the first thing I always look for when I'm writing a federal grant, I look, after I've gone through the RFP and I'm kind of serious about it, then I go to the website and I look to see what they funded in the past, how much money, what that range is, and sort of what that mode is for the amount of money that they were giving folks. Gives me a target, right? And then I'm looking to see if they're posting some sample grant applications. So I can see what other people were successful, right? And they're only going to post their best ones there. And I find that really useful to kind of see what challenges they talk about and how they talk about it. Because very often I'm not the subject matter expert on some of these grants. So it's really helpful to see successful grant applications. It's on there again, follow the instructions, and I'm just going to say it because it's really important. Proofread, again, really important. I already skipped that one. Sample applications and start early. Okay, last slide. So today we focus pretty much on the central criminal justice funding agencies. There are other funding sources. When we were on the grants.gov, I typed in justice. And you remember I had to slide down like a full page before I got to a grant that was listed from the Department of Justice. So that tells us there are other funding opportunities that aren't sort of core function for those agencies. I happened to notice this morning when I was in there just kind of testing the system, I think I typed in justice then, and there was a grant program for elder issues. So, you know, if you're having scammers come through and they're scamming old people for their driveway and roofs and, you know, different things, don't just think about Department of Justice grants. Go into SAMS, go into grants.gov and just type in the kinds of things you're interested in. You might find better opportunities from other federal funding agencies that you wouldn't have thought of. And if you called me, I definitely wouldn't have thought of those. So don't just stay in we stay mostly in our DOJ lane, but don't limit yourself to that. Everybody thinks that the casinos are cash cows. They can be. They're typically pretty criminal justice friendly, and they kind of tie pretty tightly to their geographic service area. They know where all of their people are coming from, and they're always looking to get, you know, their picture in the paper with a drug dog or with, you know, whatever it is they bought. They can be really useful funding sources for usually small projects and projects that don't take a lot of time. The applications don't take a lot of time to write for. And then usually also it's local people, so you can get to know them and talk to them and sort of grease the skids a little bit to make a successful application. Foundations, honestly, I don't have a ton of experience with foundations, but I know over the years there have been some foundations who are very law enforcement supportive. The ATV folks in Dickinson County, the Polaris, they had a program for a while. I don't know if they still do, but they were providing ATVs to law enforcement agencies at no cost. They were doing, you know, 10 a year or something like that, and they were doing it statewide. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but those are the kinds of things that you're looking for, especially for the foundations, the businesses that are local to you. Send the sheriff, send the chief to talk to those folks, and you know, with some ideas in their pocket to know what they're looking for and what they might be able to help them out with. And then there are some of the bigger foundations like Casey's, and I'm talking not the Casey Foundation, but the Casey General Store. We know that they're because of some family history, they're really pro law enforcement, really pro treatment, and so, you know, it's helpful to kind of know what they're interested in before you approach them. And so, you know, you can have some pretty good success with small grants. Usually we're talking about one-time funding for single projects. They're usually pretty good for that. And then businesses and local residents are very often. If you got something fun like a drug dog, put a picture up at the Casey's and Quick Trip, and people will throw their change in there, and before you know it, you got enough money to buy a drug dog. So that was the end of mine. I'm going to put our contacts up here, and next we're going to have we're going to start our panel discussions with the 4 agencies who administer justice grants at the state level. For the most part, we're talking about federal funds that are passed through to state agencies to share with all of you. And we're giving everybody kind of a 20, 30-minute opportunity to make a pitch for their programming and to make a pitch for you applying and being successful in their program. We're going to start with Lori Miller from the Attorney General's office. It might take me 2 seconds here to get her up and going. So your notes, if you have notes in here, they'll show up here. And you just click. Okay, you're good.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you and while you are out there in the world. My name's Lori Miller. I work for the Attorney General's office. We used to be called, we used to be called CVAD, or Crime Victims Assistance Division, and then over the last year we now have become the Victim Assistance Section of the Attorney General's office. We receive funding to support organizations who support victims of crime. So there's some grants that prevent crime. We do not have prevention grants. We are basically, the grants I oversee are to serve victims of crime. So about 95% of the money that we get is distributed out. So we keep 5% for administrative costs, and the rest is sent out throughout the state of Iowa. We fund nonprofit organizations, institutes of higher education, law enforcement offices, prosecutor offices, and other state offices with the money. Our victim assistance grants programs are competitive. So every 3 years, we hold a competition. We just started our 3-year grant cycle, October 1 of 2023. And so that cycle will end September 30th of 2026. We awarded 117 grants. Our next competition is likely to be released in 2025-2026 for the grants starting October 1 of 2026. And we will post that information on the Attorney General's website. I have the link here. I assume that will still be the link in 2025-2026, but it may not. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. The types of grants that we have them in 2 categories. One is the criminal justice grants, and the other one is the victim services grants. So we often hold 2 grant competitions, one for the criminal justice grants and one for the victim services grants. So our criminal justice grants focus on improving the criminal justice system, hold offenders accountable, and assist victims as they navigate the criminal justice process. And our victim service grants are the ones that most people think of. They're the ones that provide direct services to victims. They include counseling, advocacy, safety planning, referrals. These are the grants that support our domestic violence shelters, or the victim services shelters. They're the ones that are the ones that if someone is injured in the middle of the night, they're hurt, the law enforcement officers call them up there, go to the scene. Those are the folks we fund. And then we also have some grants that provide training, outreach, and technical assistance related to the victimization types and holding offenders accountable. So the currently funded criminal justice grants that we have are in these categories. So when we release our RFP, and Dennis did a great job talking about what the RFP is, ours is very long, but it gives you all the rules. It's the roadmap. It's what you need to do. And I tell people you should download it, you should print it, you should mark it up, you should keep it in your file, because it is something you could refer back to later. And it includes a lot of the rules and regulations about the funding sources that we have. So we have a law enforcement grant, we have prosecutor grants, victim witness coordinators. We fund one court grant, and we have community coordinated response teams. We call these the CCR grants. And those are SARTs and DARTs, which are sexual assault response team, domestic assault response team. Then our currently funded victim services grants. So again, one long RFP, and then it's broken down with all these different application types. Culturally specific programs, these are grants that are by and for. That means they are run, these are for organizations that are run by a culturally specific person or culture for that particular culture. So for example, we fund the tribe. We fund, and it's on the tribal land. We fund an organization that serves deaf Iowans. It's run by deaf Iowans for deaf Iowans. We fund a Latino organization run by Latinx for Latinx folks. And so it isn't just like our mainstream organization saying, well, we'll serve anybody, but no, it's very specific to your culture. And we allow folks to have the opportunity to implement their specific culture into serving folks. And so, like, especially with the tribe, there's particular healing services that they can offer and we can fund because that's what is relevant to their culture. And then we fund domestic violence comprehensive services, sexual assault comprehensive services, sheltering, and sheltering services. And so when we talk about the comprehensive services, these are organizations that we fund that provide the whole gamut of services for domestic violence or sexual assault victims. And then the sheltering grants, if you think about the traditional domestic violence shelter, but also we're expanding it a little bit to say sometimes people don't want to go to a shelter, and during COVID a lot of people did not go to shelters, but they were offered shelter in the form of a lot of times they went to hotels, motels, safe houses. And then we have a grant, one of our applications is survivors of homicide and other violent crimes. So we fund, I think, 10 different organizations in the state of Iowa to respond to take care of the survivors of homicide or other violent crimes. So, you know, the shooting in Perry, was it in February? No, February. Anyway, our grant teams went out there and they are now serving the survivors of that crime. And any homicide in Iowa, we have people that will be dispatched to take care of the survivors that are left behind. But then also other violent crimes like assault. We have two coalitions that we fund, the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Iowa Coalition Against Sexual Assault. They provide training and technical assistance to the member programs, which are all of these that we also fund. And then we fund the statewide hotline and chat line that's actually out of Sioux Center, Iowa. And then we have what we call VOCA projects. And these are projects that are not comprehensive, but therefore an organization to provide a specific service to victims. So for example, we might fund a child forensic center and just fund one staff person there, or we might fund a mental health counselor at an organization to provide mental health counseling to victims of violent crimes. I would say that our VOCA projects are probably the most competitive. In 2013, 2014, the state of Iowa's victim services did a reorganization. It was before I started in 2017. So they reorganized how they did the funding and how they did business. So there's 6 regions in Iowa. If you just think of Iowa, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So region 1, we make sure that we have domestic violence programming, sexual assault programming, survivors of homicide programming, sheltering program in each one of the regions in Iowa. And that way we make sure like it's not clustered all in one part of the state. So we did that, or my predecessors did that, to make sure that victim service dollars were evenly, or as evenly as possible, spread throughout the state. So we do have a tendency, or we have funded a lot of the same organizations for many years. But when VOCA money went up in 2000, I think 15, 16, we started funding more of these little projects that could step in and help out. The different types of federal funding that we get are from the Department of Justice, except for the fourth one, family violence. So the Victims of Crime Act, which is VOCA, that is our biggest funding source. And if you're in the funding world, you might know that VOCA funding is going down. It is the one funding source that is not paid by taxpayer dollars. It's paid by the fees and fines that criminals pay into the Crime Victims Fund at the federal level. And when the federal prosecution went down, like they're just not prosecuting, I guess. The fund went from the highest, I think it was in like 2017. Like if you look at the chart, it was up to like, I don't know, over $1 billion, and now it's like this. The chart is very small right now, and it used to be pretty, it took up a half a page. And so it's not funny. I don't know why I'm laughing about it, but what it's representing is a 41% cut to our funding for next year. So we are looking to see what other sources are out there, looking to see if the state can help us. There's a letter that the Attorney General's offices throughout the nation wrote to Congress saying you need to provide bridge funding. Because what happened is that we built all these programs up over the years, and now it's like, oh, sorry. And then with COVID and fundraising went down, volunteerism went down, and so it's coming on the heels of that. So we're kind of worried about a lot of our programs, but I guess we just cross our fingers and hope for the best that funding will come through. And then the other funding that comes from the Department of Justice is Stop Violence Against Women. This is OVW money, and this is the funding source that has a category. So we take the allocation amount, and 25% of it has to be for law enforcement purposes, 25% has to be for prosecution purposes, 5% for the court, I think it's 30% for culturally specific programming, 20% of the total for sexual assault programming. So there's quite a lot of rules that go along with it, but this is the funding source that we fund law enforcement and our prosecutors' offices out of. Our SAS program is only for sexual assault, and then our family violence program is for family violence. It's the domestic violence program. And then of course, here's the slide where I detail all of these. So VOCA funds is direct services, and this is the one that funds all types of crimes. And it can fund children and youth. And then Stop VAWA is only domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. So it's limited to those particular crime types. SAS funding is the funding for sexual assault services. It's our smallest grant we get, but it's very simple. It's like only fund direct services for people who have been victims of sexual assault. That's it, period. And then FIPSA funding, this is the funding that we get that helps us fund our shelters. And so there's a formula that's involved in that, and 75% of what we get has to go for sheltering, 25% for supportive services. And a little bit of FIPSA can be used for prevention, think safety planning. All right. Our grant process is competitive. Our funding announcements, our requests for proposals, our applications, all of our instructions will be posted on the Attorney General's website. We will host instructional webinars, and we have a process for posting questions and answers. And so what Dennis said is true. If you want to talk to me about grant funding, call me. My contact information's on the slide, or talk to anybody in our office. But when it comes to the actual, when we're in competition, we limit the questions to anything that you ask is public, and everybody gets that to listen to that question or hear that. You have to email it to us, and then we post it. So it isn't us just working directly with you, trying to get your grant submitted. If you have a question about our process or RFP, everybody has the opportunity to see what that question and answer is. We say that we have our own grants management system. So we used to be in Iowa Grants, and then Janelle, who is has moved on, and she was such a great grant writer. We got lots and lots of extra grants because of her, and she wrote this ginormous grant. We got a brand new grants management system, and so it's tailored to exactly what we want, but it's expensive. And we're talking to Dennis like, oh, grants is free. I'm like, yeah, free is good. I like free. But it also, we can set parameters with that system, so we can release an application and put dates on it so that you couldn't even submit anything late. And a lot of times people are like, oh, I forgot to submit this, and they'll try and email you stuff, but we're like, no, because it is competitive and it's not fair if we do things outside of this system. But Dennis gave you some really great tips about starting early, reading the instructions, proofreading, all that good stuff. Our grants are all reviewed and scored by external reviewers and by our staff. And so we have recruited external reviewers. They have a set of criteria that they also can log on to our system, and we have the review panel is right in our grants management system. They just type into the box and hit a score, and it adds it all up for them. And then we are able to print off copies of the scores, run reports, and give people their feedback if they request it. But the reviewers are always anonymous. We tell people, if you review a grant, nobody will know who you are unless you tell them. But our funding recommendations are shared with our applicants along with the instructions. And okay, we have to go to our board. I skipped that bullet there. So we get our funding recommendations from our reviewers. We also have our funding recommendations. So there's two, and then our director has his own funding recommendation. We present that to our board, the Crime Victims Assistance Board. They look at it and they determine who's going to be funded. So we say, here's our recommendations, and they almost always agree with us. And then we let folks know you've been recommended for funding, and here's the appeals process. Apparently you get to appeal it. I asked if we could take that away, and I was told no, you get to appeal. So we have funding based on different formulas, and if we didn't do something correctly, we didn't do the formula right, you have the opportunity to appeal that. But we've really structured our appeal process so we were getting people that say, I don't like your decision to not fund me, I'm appealing that. I'm like, on the basis of what? So that it really narrowed down the number of people who appealed once we put that out there. So if you would like to have funding from our office, if you're thinking, boy, I sure wish I could get some of that money, you have a while to prepare for it. But I would offer you the opportunity to look at our website and our grants manual. So you can copy our grants manual if you want, Dennis, and there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. But a lot of it is just very specific to us. We have a whole, it needs to be revamped, but and there's a search function, which is a good thing, but it gives you a whole list of policies and procedures that you need to have in place, what background checks you need to have. Like it's kind of a lot. And sometimes we joke about pulling our hair out and then all going to buy wigs together because sometimes it's just a lot. And you had this in your slide. I have it in mind. Consider being a grant reviewer. Grant reviewers have an appreciation for well-written, cohesive proposals. If you have read a grant and at the end of reading it, you say, I have no idea what you're trying to do. I have no idea what your project is. Then it's not a really well-written grant. And even with us, I could told you, we fund culturally specific organizations. A lot of the folks that write those grants, English is not their first language, but that's okay. We'll give them grace. You don't have to have perfect English, but you have to be able to articulate what you're going to do with the money. And you have to be able to tell us the things that you're going to do are allowable, and don't put unallowable things in there. almost always when we fund grants, we have to kick them back for modifications, change the budget, you know, because we never fund anybody for the amount that they apply for. So if you are a grant reviewer, you can get an idea of what it's like on the other side. So this is my advice. The very first grant training I went to, I learned this, and it holds true. Lack of money is never the problem. So when people say you have to create a problem statement, if you create a problem statement that says we have no money, that is not the problem. You need to state your problem. So I gave you an example. Our agency needs money for a rural advocate. We have no money. No, you have to. The problem is victims in rural Iowa often live in isolation and many times don't have adequate resources, blah, 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 blah. That's the problem. The money is the resource. And money isn't always the only resource. You need training, you need technical assistance, you need partnerships, you need collaboration. Money is just one resource to help you take care of the problem. So I see that a lot of time people like, the money, the problem is we have no money. Like, nope, it's not the problem. Here's my contact information. I did not take 30 minutes, so there you go. Dennis, would you like some of my time?
Just a quick question. The 3 years is why? To just have continuity for the types of programs you're supporting? Is that what the decision was?
Right. Before I got there, they used to do an annual funding, and so you're funding and then you're funding and then you're always in the constant cycle of grant review. And so, right, it does. So the first year that you apply is the big competition, the big grant. And then we also have continuing grants. So you only get funded for 1 year, but then the next year you submit a continuing application and it's not competitive, but you have to submit a new budget, update your scope of work. Yeah, but yeah.
We're going to have a Q&A at the end after all 4 agencies have gone. So unless it's really, clarification on something that was just said, we'll hold questions for the Q&A. Okay. Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome.
Okay. Are you going to be next? Yep, you are. Yep, come on up. So Kathy from CJJP, and I just realized a minute ago, I've been throwing around the acronym CJJP all morning. And it stands for Criminal and Juvenile Justice Planning. And they primarily administer the juvenile funding that comes to the state of Iowa. Okay, so just forward,
Gotcha.
backwards.
Thank you. Okay, so like Dennis said, Kathy Nestvey. I'm an executive officer with Criminal and Juvenile Justice Planning. And before I launch into any of my slides, because Dennis did such a nice commercial while he was talking about all the CJJP data and we've got all this and all that, I wanted to make sure that everybody in the room knows that I'm gonna ask you to make sure those links go out to the.
They're in the chat.
Okay, because I was thinking of the people here in the room because I know, yeah, we put it in the chat. But even if you wanted to look them up prior to that coming out after today, it's easy access to adult criminal data if you want to look at stuff data on the adult side. Then the other one is called easy access to juvenile court data, excuse me. So if you Google either of those, you should be able to get there if you don't want to wait for the link for those folks that are in the room here. And we do those outward facing dashboards, and I did have you mention, or we mentioned this earlier, but it's like, that's like the self-service version, like when you go to Hy-Vee or wherever and you do the self-service checkout, that's kind of the level it's at. If you want to work with a cashier, our staff, we can get you more than that. We can dig a lot deeper and do much more complex data analysis, but the self-serve or the self-checkout thing, you would have immediate access to that. And it has pretty basic information that is useful more universally. And I do also want to mention, so Criminal and Juvenile Justice Planning, we used to be in the Department of Human Rights, and that was partially to maintain our neutrality. So we never, or keeping us away from being in any justice related department was intentional because a lot of our work is around research and data. and policy. So having that neutrality, and being removed like that was very helpful for us. During the realignment, we were moved into HHS as a whole. And our team actually is split into two, kind of. We work together on some things, but we have a partial part of the team that works primarily on the adult system. And they do more research and data analysis. That's their focus, certainly. On the juvenile justice side, which I'm going to spend entirely the time talking about those fundings, because that's where we have money right now. On the juvenile justice side, we do data analysis sorts of things, certainly, but we oversee the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act funding that comes to us from the federal government. And as a result of that, we also do policy related work, system improvement kinds of things. So those two teams do have some crossover and work together, but they are kind of separate. And the reason I bring it up is because after we were all moved into HHS together, around Christmas time, they told us they were separating us. And now the folks that work on the adult stuff are in the Department of Management. You can still, right now, this name CJJP is being used by both of us for the moment. I don't know, that's not going to last. So for the folks on the adult side, they're probably the ones who are going to get to keep the name. On the juvenile side, we're still, right now, like I said, we're still using the name, but we're probably going to have something different in the future. So just know that, but I will continue to refer to us as CJJP for now. That's where my loyalty lies anyway, at the moment. So the first piece of funding I want to talk to you about is, like I said, from the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. And this is funding that we always apply for. Our agency applies for this federal funding, and it's formula funding, excuse me. And Dennis, you covered this earlier. Formula funding is non-competitive. You still have to apply for it though. So we apply for that funding, and it comes through our office, and then we redistribute it out across the state. And at present, this dollar amount fluctuates from year to year, but at present, it's about $400,000. And those are made available annually, even though the life of the funding is longer. So the funding life is 3 years long, but when we redistribute, I gotta stop saying that word, I can't spit it out. When we send it out locally, the folks have to apply annually. So even though the money has a 3-year life, you apply one time a year. And it is intended, really the primary parameter for that money is that it go for services for kids that are involved in the juvenile justice system. So our young lawbreakers, providing services for them, that's the big parameter that's put on that funding. So anyone who is applying needs to keep that in mind. The way it operates at a functional level is that it's actually the local juvenile court office that makes the application. So juvenile court services in each of those judicial districts will be the one that applies. They are not necessarily the one that does the service provision though. So they may then, will turn around and subcontract with a service provider. Sometimes it's in-house work that they're doing as well though, so it can go either way. But they're always the applicant. And part of that is because the intention with the federal money is to keep them actively involved in making the decisions about what the kids need locally. They are the juvenile court office, so we want them involved in deciding what kind of services are necessary and where the gaps are locally for them. And that allocation does have a formula, hence the name formula. But that formula doesn't come to us from the feds. So it's a little different. We have a formula at the state level, and we decide how much of that $400,000 goes to each of the judicial districts based on how many kids they have. So it's a simple formula. How many kids have you got age 10 to 17? And then we give a proportional amount to each of the 8 judicial districts based on that youth population. And it's federal fiscal year, as no surprise since it's federal funding. The thing I guess I want to point out here, because it's juvenile court that applies, that doesn't necessarily mean other folks who are interested in working with juvenile justice kids can't be involved in that. It would just be a matter of connecting with your local juvenile court service folks in order to be a part of that process. So each of the judicial districts has a chief juvenile court officer, and that would be a good place to start if you have an interest in providing services to kids that are breaking the law, or if you know somebody that does, and talking to them about wanting to be a part of their application process for this particular pot of money. One of the good things about this particular pot is that it's very stable. So this is money that we've had for decades. It's not, like some discretionary grants, competitive grants come and go quickly and you don't necessarily can't count on them long term. This is a longer term pot of money, so it's much more reliable that it's going to continue to be there. As far as application process goes, historically we've put the application out around August. This last year, with all the changes we've experienced in the restructuring of state government, we've decided that we need to back that up a little and put that application out sooner. So it'll come out probably early summer is what we're kind of looking at, and it will be on Iowa grants. And the program area is juvenile delinquency prevention. So if you get in, right now it is anyway. Right now, if you get in IR grants and you look for the program area, juvenile delinquency prevention, Title II funding will come up as an option. You'll see that on the list. The reason I'm looking at Dennis and kind of laughing about that is because the program areas in the Iowa grant system, and maybe you can tell me where we're at with this, Dennis, but are intended to switch from being kind of name-based like that or topic-based to being agency name. So like ours would be, instead of juvenile delinquency prevention, would be criminal and juvenile justice planning would be the program area. Not there. That's not where we're at. Okay. You could have some more time to talk to us. So that's not going to happen though. Dennis is shaking his head. Well, that's a good thing, because for us, we were concerned since our name is undetermined at this point. So you're good with juvenile delinquency prevention then. That'll last for a while. I did want to point out too, just as a resource, a lot of times, folks are, well, what kind of services? What are you talking about when you're saying services for kids? These 3 links that I provided here are a good place to start. They're clearinghouses for services that are considered evidence-based or research-based for kids. So if you're going to make a grant proposal, it would be good, to select something from this sort of list. It's not that the kind of homegrown programs can't be successful, but when you're doing a grant application, your chances of being successful increase if you've got something that you can say, this is already proven, this is something that works. And these are places that you can find lists of those kinds of services. Another pot of funding that we have, and this is was a discretionary pot of funding for us, so we had to compete for this funding. Also comes from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And we wrote our proposal intending to fund locally pre-charge diversion. So when a kid's taken into custody, instead of making the referral to juvenile court services, referring them to a program so that they don't have to have that charge or complaint on their record, that they can get diverted to a service prior to that process happening. So it was intended for low-level offenses, kids that are just have their dumb moment and get caught having their dumb moment, and you really don't think that they need anything more. So we did fund in Fort Dodge, in Iowa City, and in Davenport 3 pre-charge diversion programs. And then our intention was with the second round, and that's kind of where we're at now. And we did put an RFP out for this, was to fund another round of pre-charge diversion programs. And we ran into exactly what Dennis was talking about this morning, that a lack of applicants or a lack of quality applicants. So we couldn't even give the money away to do pre-charge diversion because of the low quality applications and few applications that we got. So we're in the process now of looking to expand it. So instead of just pre-charge diversion, we're going to expand it to look at diversion much more broadly than that. So it's still going to be the front end of the system as far as kids who are not committing, not the felony kids, not even the ag misdemeanor kids. We're looking at the kids who are kind of committing those low-level offenses, which does make up the bulk, honestly, of the juvenile justice system. So we're going to expand that definition We don't have that determined yet, exactly what that's going to look like, so I can't give you as much detail as I would like to today. Because one of the things that we're going to do is consult with the chief juvenile court officers to talk to them about what gaps they've got, and what they need in terms of diversion. And partially because they just recently instituted a new diversion policy for juvenile justice kids as well. So once we have more meat on the bones, I guess, of what that's going to look like, we'll put that out, put that particular competitive grant out pretty quickly. Hopefully also probably by early summer. I would be happy to see it out at that point in time if we can pull that off. The amount here, and this was for our initial projects, so for the pre-charge programs, it was a total of 125,000 per. The intention was to continue to kind of fund it at that. We wanted to fund as many programs as possible, but we're looking at having, again, a little bit of the problem with we can't give away our money. So the expansion, and again, it'll be the program area juvenile delinquency prevention if you look in our grants, but this expansion will be up to a potential, oops, that's maybe the next slide. Nope, I must have gone too fast. I didn't even, oh, there it is. I did go too fast. So for this particular project, though, we're looking at having up to $1 million to fund diversion for juvenile diversion services. That obviously will be split into multi-year and multi-project sites. So it's not necessarily going to be one entity gets $900,000. It'll be spread around. The intention is to spread it around the state and fund more than one project. Again, we're still figuring out the exact details of what that's going to look like. So I'm limited on how much I can tell you as far as specifics for that today. One of the things that's crucial in terms of qualifiers for this particular pot of money is that it has to be a local unit of government that acts as the applicant. Again, they don't necessarily have to be the one providing the service. It's fine for a local unit of government to turn around and subcontract that as well, to have somebody else do the actual service. But this comes to us from the feds. So this is a federal requirement that it be a local unit of government that applies. So for example, in our current pre-charge diversion programs, it's the city of Fort Dodge, and it's the county that does it in the Davenport area. So Scott County does it. They're the applicant, but they're not the ones providing the service. It could be directly. So in particular with pre-charge diversion, there are law enforcement agencies around the state that have their own pre-charge diversion programs, and they could just directly apply. So that's certainly a possibility, but there are options there. Excuse me. It can be for a brand new program or an expansion of an existing program. I don't know if anybody's talked about splicing today. The qualifier on the expansions is that you can't replace existing funding with a new funding source. That would be supplanting and highly frowned upon. But it can be an expansion, so into a broader geographic area or to include more types of kids in the program. So it can be for an existing program. We just have to be kind of cautious about what that looks like. And the last one I'm going to mention is still kind of up in the air. This is funding we've had the last couple of years, and it's state funding rather than federal. And it's been $140,000, not a lot of money. And it has been earmarked for 4 cities, specifically our 4 largest metro areas in the state, to do alternative to detention programming. So alternatives to kid jail type of programming. And we ran into the same thing here where we didn't have an applicant this last time. We had initially funded a program that did this, and because they received funding once, they could not receive it again immediately, and none of the other 3 cities applied in time. There were a couple that were interested, but they didn't get their application done in time. So what we're doing with this particular pot is we're going to suggest to the legislature that they broaden the definition of this as well. So it's not just 4 cities, for one, that are eligible for it, that we, expand that. So we have a larger applicant pool. Obviously the legislative session is currently going, so I can't tell you where that's going to land yet, but hopefully this will also be a pot of money that we're able to put out there as well for juvenile delinquency prevention. How'd I do on time? Okay, that's all I have for you.
All right, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau and just traffic safety a little bit. Just a little bit about me. I'm the Bureau Chief of the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. I've been with the Bureau now for 2.5 years. Before that, I spent 34 years with the Iowa State Patrol. So I've been in traffic safety really my entire career. My dad was a state trooper, so my whole life has been kind of surrounded by the state patrol. Back in our little town, I used to do motorcycle tests right out in the middle of the street. That's how they give somebody their motorcycle license. So it's a little different now. But the GTSB, the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau, our mission is to identify traffic safety issues and through partnerships with city, county, and local organizations develop and implement strategies to reduce death and injury on Iowa's roadways. We use National Highway Traffic Safety Administration funds for grants to improve traffic safety. It's our only funding source. We might have a couple opportunities here or there through the Governor's Highway Safety Association, but we usually don't take advantage of that. I heard it said maybe a little bit ago about how it's kind of a challenge sometimes finding good, effective projects, and we've experienced that. I think especially coming out of COVID, a lot of partnerships disappeared. A lot of our regular grant recipients kind of fell off the map a little bit, so we're kind of in a rebuilding phase right now. But in 2023, there are 378 traffic fatalities in Iowa's roadways. It's the worst since 2016. And so, we're really trying to scratch back and try to get back on a better trajectory on reducing traffic fatalities. Just a little bit of overview for us is that we administer the state of Iowa's allocation of federal highway safety funds. So we're Iowa's highway safety office. Every state in the District of Columbia has a highway safety office. So Congress annually appropriates traffic safety funds to NHTSA. NHTSA distributes a portion of those funds to Iowa to address the state's priority highway safety programs that we put into our highway safety plan. And so, the process was pretty much like this. There's an authorization through Congress and an appropriation. And then the apportionment is how it's divided amongst the states. And if you see back there on the bottom right hand, the formula coming to Iowa, 75% population, 25% road mileage. That's what's determined what Iowa gets for our apportionment of these traffic safety funds. So this last year is around $9.6 million that came through our office, or comes into our office annually. We have 5 years total to distribute those funds. So we do have some carryovers. Last year, we awarded $11 million in funding, and I'll get through it, but it's, it's in a reimbursement type of basis. And so I'll go over that in just a little bit. In Iowa, this is how highway safety is looking, is that the state of Iowa puts together, it's a big collaborative plan on strategic highway safety that the Department of Transportation leads. We analyze data, we're a part of that process. We identify problems, we develop emphasis areas, and we set our goals. Now, after that, then we split off to the right to where we make our highway safety plan. We're focused on driver behaviors. So we're focused on the speed, the impaired, and the taking risky decisions. NHTSA approves our side of the highway safety plan. So this $9.6 million that comes in, that's through NHTSA. Now, on the other side of that, our highway safety improvement program funds that are more infrastructure, more roadway that the Department of Transportation administers, and that's Federal Highway Administration evaluates that. Both of our missions are meant to make the highway safer, to save lives and reduce injuries that result from traffic crashes. This is our structure. Every state, the governor assigns a governor's representative. For Iowa, that's Commissioner Baines or the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, who appoints a bureau chief or a coordinator, that would be me, that coordinates the activities through our Highway Safety Office. We have a staff of 12 with the budget analyst, we have a law enforcement liaison, media and communication specialists, 7 program administrators, administrative assistant, and program evaluators. So that's the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau office. We have 1 open FTE right now in the program area that I want to devote towards traffic records program coordinating. Went through 1 hiring process, didn't really get the candidate that we wanted, so we're going to wait a little bit to kind of get out of the winter, maybe, to make it available again. And so what we do is we apply a lens of safe system. This is from Federal Highway Administration. We apply this lens to everything that we do. And this is all based on some principles for a safe highway that's on the outside of this circle. Death and serious injury is unacceptable. Humans make mistakes. Humans are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared. Safety is proactive, and redundancy is critical. If we look back towards the umbrella, we can see how we have, the driver behavior part of it all, but then also the highway system. The highways are much safer than they used to be, with guardrails and shoulders and wider ditches and all those things. And then on the inside, some of these layers of protection have these elements that are safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. So we try to look at everything that we do. How do we round out our highway safety plan? We try to have it with this kind of lens, and how do we interact with other funding sources through Federal Highway Administration to accomplish that, to make Iowa safer. And so this is something that's new from the Federal Highway just in the last couple of years, but it really is something that that our office and the Iowa Department of Transportation, we're all on the same page here, and we're trying to look at how we can collectively affect traffic safety in Iowa. So we utilize NHTSA's countermeasures at work to select our projects, to round out our highway safety plan. And so this is something that comes out every few years. This is the newest edition of NHTSA's countermeasures that work for highway safety offices. And it's a guide or a basic reference to assist us selecting effective science-based behavioral strategies and countermeasures to address major highway problems. It describes strategies, countermeasures relevant to our office, summarizes their use, effectiveness, and costs, and implementation time. And so we prioritize all of our funding based on these countermeasures. I'll give a couple of little examples. This is through in impaired driving, alcohol impaired driving. And so one of the effective countermeasures for enforcement, and you can see how it highlights the effectiveness of a certain countermeasure, the cost, the use, how much do we use it, and the timeline it takes to implement these. And so this is probably our most popular project through our office, is with law enforcement agencies across the state. I think it's upwards around 200 law enforcement agencies across the state that engage in traffic enforcement activities. It's an effective countermeasure through high visibility saturation patrols and integrated enforcement. Integrated enforcement is basically, I'm out conducting enforcement activities. I stop somebody for speed or a traffic violation. I find impairment. And so another effective countermeasure that we use. Just another example for underage drinking. We're working with the Alcoholic Beverage Division to increase how many alcohol compliance checks on licensed establishments we conduct in Iowa. There's a lot of room for growth in this area, so we're trying to find projects to increase that. Prosecution and adjudication. We just completed a project with the judicial branch just last year to send 2 different court systems, one from Lynn, one from Webster County, to attain OWI court foundational training. It was in Billings, Montana. And so they're standing up a couple of OWI courts in those jurisdictions, to address, recidivism and how do we stop that cycle of reoffense for impaired driving. And then prevention, intervention, the GTSB, we just granted, and it's our first year with a project with Story County Early Treatment and Prevention Coalition. So they're standing up the establishment of multilateral partnership to encourage early treatment and substance use disorders to reduce impaired driving. So when we get a proposal, we're looking at the countermeasures. What do we need to make sure that this project is successful and addresses the problem? So these are just a couple of examples. There's countermeasures for all the top 11 dangerous driving behaviors that are in this big guide. But if you look for countermeasures that work through NHTSA, there's an online version, and it's really easy to find and navigate through. But so the 11 most dangerous driving behaviors: alcohol impaired, drug impaired, seatbelt, child restraints, speeding, distracted driving, motorcycle safety, young drivers, old drivers, pedestrian safety, bicycle safety, drowsy driving. So when we get proposals, what we're going to do is we're going to tie them back to a countermeasure. We're going to probably have some negotiations back and forth with whoever is proposing a project for grant funding, and we're going to collectively develop a successful, what we believe is going to be a successful project. So for our grant cycle, it looks a lot like this. I just grabbed this off the internet, but really it's a lot like this for us. Right now, we're in the pre-award phase. And so our funding through NHTSA runs for the federal fiscal year, starts October 1st and runs through September 30th. So right now, if anybody's thinking about applying for a grant with the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau for some of this NHTSA funding, now's the time really to be thinking about developing the project and a budget, putting things together. Here later on this month, we hope to be able to open funding for applications and to start receiving some applications that we can consider. We're just kind of going through a couple of internal things, so we're not really sure if we're going to be able to open that up in the next week or two. But when we do, we're going to send it out through Iowa Grants, make that notice. We'll send emails out to all law enforcement, anybody. We have a pretty broad email group. And then past grant recipients, and we're considering even putting it out on a press release also. We want as many good quality applications as we can to address these driving issues. And so, continuing in the pre-award phase after that, and it'll be open for about 4 weeks. Sometimes we'll extend it. We don't have a hard line also. We'll open it up and we'll close it, and we're gonna use these project proposals to develop our highway safety plan. But if we're missing some things, we're gonna continue to entertain projects throughout the year. We want to get most of them in as early as possible to develop our highway safety plan. But if somebody comes in kind of late or misses a deadline, a lot of times we're still going to entertain those proposals. So in March, we'll begin reviewing those applications and making some risk assessments. April, we'll hope to make some funding decisions and make sure we're rounding out our project selections. May, we draft our highway safety plan and include some of these projects that are, all of the projects that are selected that come in that we want to award grant funds to. And then we submit that to NHTSA for their review. There it's going to take a little while for their review. They might have some requests for additional information. A lot of those, there's a deadline, I think, in August for that. And so then we hope to execute all approved project agreements in September for them to be ready to go and to go underway October 1st. And like I said, it'll run October 1st through September 30th. But that's basically our grant cycle. Just this year is our first year for a triennial highway safety plan. And so we're kind of navigating through that on a 3-year cycle. But still, applications for funding are on an annual basis, but we can have a 3-year project with annual funding. So we're still kind of working on what that's going to look like, but in the meantime, it's a continuous cycle for us. And so what we'll do, and like I said, the Governor's Traffic Safety relies on federal funding to carry out all of our functions. So we're very close with them. We have a lot of guidelines and code of federal regulations that we follow with them. So once the funding's in place, grant agreement is executed, the work starts, and the subrecipient will request reimbursement along with reports and documentation, just like it's in the cycle here. So with us, like I say, it's all on a reimbursement basis. So after the funding is there, a grant recipient is going to perform the agreed upon activities, going to pay for the agreed upon activities, going to submit reports and supporting documentation, that the work and the activities have been completed, and then pay for all of those. Submit a claim to the Governor's Traffic Safety Bureau. We review those claims, make sure they're complete, and then what we'll do is we'll pull down funding in a grants tracking system through NHTSA, and then we reimburse the agency performing those activities. And it's really much like our office. We operate on NHTSA's funding also. We're just another project through our NHTSA grant funds that come in. And so, like I said, we have like over 200 grant recipients and projects throughout the year. There's a lot of law enforcement projects. Some of those examples are just high visibility enforcement that are from just a variety in almost every corner of the state. But we also have some research grants through Iowa State University, University of Iowa, Criminal Juvenile Justice Program. We provide some funding for the collection of that data. We rely heavily on that to even for project selection on our agencies actually arresting impaired drivers. How many citations and charges are being filed, and what do those things look like? So we have a host of those, and just trying to round out our highway safety plan as much as possible to include as many of the countermeasures as we can to address problems. And so I'm going to go over just a little bit why the driver behavior is so important. So here this last year, about a year ago, we embarked on a traffic research campaign and research development on what's going to reach drivers out there, what's going to convince them to change their behavior. So a series of focus groups and validation studies and everything is where we're trying to develop a new campaign. And this is what risky drivers tell us. So I decided, even though I felt a little fuzzy in the eyeballs, I was going to drive. I feel like it was a bit of a gamble, but I knew it was the safest option. I'm not sure why people think like that, but a lot of the public, that's what they're thinking. These are our risky drivers. These are the people that are doing that, and this is why driver behaviors, so important. So, our campaign material is being drafted around that. People think they're good drivers. People think it's everybody else, and so that's what we hear over and over and over again. It's always the other person. It's not me. I'm a pretty good drunk driver. I know what I'm doing. I think it's the safest option just to drive. So it's not. I'm a professional distracted driver. I always have to take care of something when I'm driving, but I have some techniques to mitigate the risk. We heard it over and over and over again. People think they're good at it. People think I've been driving and staring at my phone for a long time. I know how to do it, and so this is another thing that we're just trying to reach these risky drivers to change their behavior. The enforcement, the education, the awareness, everything that we're doing is try to change this behavior. And in my personal vehicle, I'm usually not wearing a seatbelt. If I'm driving on 2 lanes, I leave it off. While on the highway, I throw it on. What we know is that, contrary to what people might believe, you're the most safe on interstate roadways. There's more safety features on interstate roads. People are driving the same distances. There's controlled access points. The 2-lane roads, while you feel there's not as much traffic out there and I'm safer, you're not. And this is where our single vehicle people that aren't wearing seat belts, they'll miss a curve because they're distracted or going too fast or impaired. They're not wearing their seat belt, they get ejected out of the car and they die. And so these are the things that we're up against. This is what all of our funding through NHTSA is intended to try to address. And so I know that we have a lot of partners out there, but you know, we're always looking for new and different kinds of projects to address driver safety. And so when we open up that notice of funding availability, we really hope that that we get a new crowd coming in. I think, and I heard it earlier today also, is that we usually have our same grant applications coming in, and we're no different. We've had the same people come in, we fund the same thing year after year after year. And so it's a real challenge for us to find new projects. And so we're constantly reaching out and trying to foster those relationships and encourage them to apply for funding. And so that's all I have. Thanks.
Okay, well, you started with me and you're gonna end with me, so that's good, right? Okay, I'm gonna give you a brief overview of some of the ODCP grants. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much with these because all of them are a little bit different, and you've heard some of this today. My hope with today's training is that maybe you came in with a good idea, or you thought, oh, we need this. So maybe somebody's going to tell me how I get it, right? How am I going to write this grant, or what's out there that I can apply for? My hope is that you heard something today, whether it was from BJA or one of our state partners here presenting, that maybe sparked something that you can go back and dig deeper into it, right? You can, if you heard something about cold cases from the feds, maybe you can go search that, right? Or traffic safety or whatever it is. So my hope is, I know this, a lot of this was kind of dry and long, and we're throwing just tons of information at you. So I'm going to try to whip through this pretty quick, but we want to give you the highlights, right? So we hope you can take something from this and go back to your agencies, and all of us want new applications, right? We all want new projects and new good ideas. So hopefully this helps. Okay, so for ODCP grants, like Dennis said earlier, we use iowogrants.gov. You have to be a unit of government to apply to us for almost everything, if not everything. I know there are some nonprofits and faith-based organizations here today. Your projects are important and valid and eligible if you apply through a unit of government. Okay, so you just have to have that unit of government to be your fiscal agent for you and apply on your behalf. Our grants are competitive, it's been mentioned, but you have to write a good application to score well to be funded. So again, read the instructions. The scoring is going to be outlined, proofread, and you have to do a good job of articulating the problem so that whatever great idea you have to address that problem meshes, right? You can't, like was said earlier, you can't come in and say, oh, we just don't have any money. That's our problem. You have to get to the actual root of the problem. Like we already talked about iowogrants.gov. Cash match depends on the grant. So in our current burn JAG application process, it is open. This is our biggest one. This is where we're encouraging applications right now. It closes March 8th. Everybody write it down, iowogrants.gov, burn JAG, get your applications in. We eliminated the cash match for this cycle. and we're going to see how that goes. But again, it is still encouraged. And if you have a really good sustainability plan, you can be kind of incentivized for that, for the cash match or sustainability. If you're thinking ahead, right? You're not just on a whim going to try to get something that then you can't sustain. This was mentioned once, but you can't supplant. If you don't know what that means, reach out. We can explain it. Or if you have questions about what's currently in your budget, with your city or county, you reach out to us and we can help. And then allowable and unallowable expenses. This is typically going to be listed in the instructions. So, for example, our Burn Jag program specifically says in the instructions, we don't fund drones, we don't fund weapons, we don't fund this list of things. So if you apply to us for a drone, you're not going to get funded, right? So again, read the instructions. Okay, I'm going to get into the details on just a handful of our grants. John R. Justice, the purpose of John R. Justice is to retain prosecutors and public defenders. Typically those jobs don't pay as well, so people leave. There's a lot of turnover. So the idea is let's help these folks with some student loan repayment, right? Because they oftentimes have a lot of debt. We are currently in year 3 of our last cohort. We do this in a 3-year cycle because it's a real pain to administer. If you are a prosecutor or a public defender, or you know someone that is, you're eligible to apply. We split it 50-50 between the 2 groups, and we divide it out over our congressional districts. You must remain in your qualifying position for at least 3 years. That's why we do it in a 3-year cohort. And you can expect to receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $12,000 in student loan repayment. It goes directly to your student loan servicer, so we have found that people are appreciative. Project Safe Neighborhoods is to address violent crime. Again, you got to be a unit of government to apply. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern and the Southern District established the priorities for each district. The next application is opening soon. So if you're on the email list, watch for some information on that. It'll be coming out soon. Check Iowa grants, right? So Southern District, we have about $116,000. We haven't had a ton of interest in this program. So if you have an idea of how to address violent crime in your community, consider PSN. Coverdell is a improvement in forensic science and medical examiner services. Units of government that operate a forensic lab or the ME can apply. If you or your department operate a lab and you apply for this funding, you either have to be accredited or you have to use the funds to become accredited. So that's one of the stipulations of this. The next application also coming soon. Some of these are opening very soon. JAG, like I said, is open now. Some of these are going to be coming quickly. We tend to run a lot of our grants on a state fiscal year, even though they're federal dollars. So what often happens is 2023 funding should have been out, right? Or 2024 funding should have been out, and it's delayed, and there's the process, and the feds are late getting in. We have requirements that we have to do and all these things. So we end up funding kind of behind a little bit. So a lot of these are going to be coming up soon for a start date of July 1. So it's that plan ahead thing that has been mentioned several times. Okay, RSAT is residential substance abuse treatment. So the purpose is to fund treatment programs in a correctional or detention facility. Jails and prisons are eligible, but you can't charge a pay to stay. So if you're a jail that charges, doesn't work. I think we had a jail reach out recently that said, well, they don't pay anyway, so we just won't charge, right? And then we can do treatment. Treatment has to be segregated from the rest of the population. Next cycle is open right now. We have about $364,000, and those applications are due March 8th. All right, burn jag. This is our big one. It's been about $1.6 to $2 million for several years now. The purpose is to prevent and control drugs and crime and improve the criminal justice system. It's very broad. It's very broad. There are 6 federally approved purpose areas: law enforcement, prosecution, courts, prevention and education, corrections and community corrections, drug treatment, and planning, evaluation, and technology improvement programs. Excuse me. Like I said, it's very broad and flexible. We encourage innovative new ideas, like Dennis said earlier, with sound criminal justice principles, right? This is the one I mentioned earlier. Whoops. We don't fund, and it's in the instructions, we don't fund weapons, canines. We don't fund DARE with this, bulletproof vests, tasers, basic law enforcement equipment, constructions, drones, vehicles, harm reduction. There are specific things that we outline that we don't fund with this project. If you have any questions about what falls in that unallowable expense, just let us know. I'd rather tell you up front that it doesn't qualify. You know, if it's we get this a lot, our cameras are outdated and we need new ones. Well, we consider that kind of standard issue equipment, right? You already have them. We're probably not going to fund replacement equipment. Same thing with weapons. We get that a lot. People want new things. All right. Burn Skip is the newest grant that we, as the SAA, are administering. This was authorized by the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act of 2022. This is the Biden administration's gun money. So it's Burn State Crisis Intervention Program. And the idea is to fund state crisis intervention programs and initiatives. So court proceedings, intervening in gun violence, preventing future gun violence. We were required by the feds to pull together an advisory board. So we did that about a year ago. We met a couple of times. That advisory board identified behavioral health as our top priority in the state. We have done one competitive application cycle already. The next one is going to be coming soon. We were kind of not super thrilled with the applications we got. So if you have ideas that might fit into this, we would really like to hear about those. The next cycle could have potentially 1.5 million or so. So if you've got ideas, let's talk about it. Okay, here's our contact information again. We're going to do a little Q&A if everybody that presented wants to come up. If you have any questions. I know some people really wanted to be here and some people were told to be here. So either way, thank you. I know it's a lot of information we just threw at you today, but we really do appreciate you being here. If you have any feedback, feel free to reach out. Like we said earlier, this is our first try at this. We really want to encourage new applications, new projects, innovative ideas, lots of questions. So please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Questions. What would you like to know? Let's go check the chat. Nothing.
While we're checking questions, I have a couple of things I want to add. You knew I was going to do this,
Seriously,
right?
we could have someone sit.
But I blame you because you made me think of at least one of them. I don't think that Michelle, when she was talking about federal grants, talked about the Bulletproof Vest program. Did she talk about it? Did I miss it? Okay. Bulletproof Vest, I think they actually call it partnership. The Bulletproof Vest partnership is federal funding that covers 50% of the cost of bulletproof vests for law enforcement and correctional officers. And they prioritize funding to agencies that are serving under 100,000 population. So I have submitted and organized the state, so we have to do one on behalf of the whole state. I've organized that for the last 12 or 15 years. We used to get $60,000, $70,000. In recent years, they stopped giving money to any agency that serves over 100,000 population. So I keep submitting. The grant is so easy to submit, I just keep submitting it. It literally takes longer to register for the grant program than it does to submit the application. It really, all you're doing is adding, so they've defined for you which vests they've tested and you can purchase with this program. And you just go in and select the vest. You tell them how many, you tell them the cost, you tell them the shipping, done. Submit it, off it goes. And they're doing a really good job of reaching pretty far into the communities. I look at the list every year and I'm always surprised how few Iowa applicants, because pretty much everybody who's applying is getting, it varies, you know, some years they're getting 100% of what they asked for, which is 50% of the cost. But they're really, if you're not applying for the Bulletproof Vest program and you're buying and paying for vests and you're serving in a population of under 100,000, you're leaving money on the table. So make sure that you apply to that program. We got a question, yep.
So if so I have a capital improvement project that's already budgeted for X number every year already, then would that be supplanting?
Yeah. So the question is, if I already have it in my budget, is it supplanting? There are ways around that, and we'll talk when I'm not being recorded. Yeah.
Federal prison isn't so bad.
Yeah. He said, for those on the line, he said, I heard federal prison isn't quite so bad. So, so supplanting is essentially replacing what you've budgeted for, whether it's people or things, with a federal grant. So if it's in your budget, you can't cover it. But if it's in your budget for 3 years from now, change your budget 3 years from now. Right?
Or buy more.
Or buy more. Yeah, you can buy them quicker.
Supplement.
You can buy them on a quicker pace. Yep. But if it's in your budget, if you have a specific line item for it, I would not recommend that you ask for federal funding for it. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And Susie made me think of something too. So if we manage solicitation and we don't get good applications, we don't fund them, right? So sometimes, we've all talked a little bit about the challenge, to us, this is very recent, the recent challenge of getting good applications. The SKIP grant program that Susie just talked about, we left some money for the next round. We're just going to roll it into the next round, and hopefully we do a good job today and in other events to encourage good, strong grant applications. So if we don't have a good grant, we're not going to spend the money. The last thing I wanted to mention before we ask for questions is timing of awards. This was in my notes, but I bounced around so much I forgot to talk about it. So if you apply to our office for a grant, we tell you in the RFP when the grant cycle starts, and that's pretty close to when you're going to get the money. Michelle's gone, so I can say this. If you apply to the feds for a grant, they also tell you when you're going to have money for the project, but they lie. So they tell you it's going to be available October 1, and it technically is. And you actually have to start doing reporting on it, financial reporting and quarterly reporting. But you can depend on that grant funding not being available until January or February or later. If you're new to this, we kind of have it down to a science. So we know exactly what we're going to have to submit to clear all the conditions. We get it done early. But if it's new to you, you might be looking at 3 quarters or even a full year before you really have access to that funding. So the reason I'm telling you that is just to kind of set your expectations. But most importantly, you can't obligate, and obligate in this case means you can't commit to a contract. You definitely can't spend the money but you can't make any commitments on that funding until you get the actual approval from the Department of Justice to start spending the money. So plan on at least, the fiscal year starts October 1. We don't get our money until January or February, and it sometimes is even well after that, and you have no control over it. No control. Well, I mean, the only thing you have control over is getting your stuff submitted, but after that, you have no control over when the funds are available to you.
We have a question. Yeah, do you just want to read the questions in the chat and start answering them?
Oh, we have lots of questions. Is that the first one?
Yeah.
Does the COPS hiring grant come out every year, or is it just certain years? Yes, it's annually. And you know, I haven't been involved directly in the COPS hiring grants. I think they're in the spring, but I wouldn't swear to that. But it's an annual offering from the COPS office. When you email out the recording of the training, will you also send out grant writing classes or courses that will assist in actual writing of grants, please? We will now. Yep. What type of projects are you looking for through SCIP? Can you provide some examples of what you received in applications that were funded versus those that were not of interest? You want to do that, or you want me to?
Sure, I don't care.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so SCIP threw us kind of a curveball. We had 12 applications. We recommended funding 10 of them. Normally, BJA just gives us our grant money and lets us do our competitive process and administer it how we want within their guidelines. In this case with SCIP, BJA has to approve our sub-grants. So all of the projects that we wanted to fund, we had to then not only go through the competitive process, and our review team said, these are the ones we want to fund. They brought it to me and I said, yep, I want to fund these. I took it to the commissioner. He said, yep, let's fund these. We submitted it to BJA and BJA denied some of them. So it threw us a little bit of a curveball. So we are picking a fight with BJA at the moment, and we are asking them to reconsider some of our projects. So the ones that we got approved were some of the virtual reality training, de-escalation, a couple of nonprofits for work with high risk. I think one of them was high risk youth, wasn't it? An access center to address immediate mental health and substance use needs.
Lots of direct service stuff.
Yeah, direct services. So behavioral health, meaning mental health, substance use, all of it together is the top priority for the state of Iowa per our advisory board. But keep in mind, it might be worth a phone call to talk about what kind of ideas you have before you go to all the work of writing a grant on that one.
Let's go ahead and read this.
I think that's it. Then,
Was that it?
Medina said, yep, we'll send out the training. Any other questions? What else can we answer? Yep.
I have a question that kind of asked this before, but I really want clarification. So I'm thinking about the correctional facility, we're 1 of 10 from the Department of Corrections. Do you prefer grants that come from the state agency that benefit all 10 agencies, or are we on our own one at a time to apply for all these grants individually?
Okay, so the question came from Department of Corrections, Mount Pleasant facility, whether we prefer individual applications or kind of a one DOC application all at once.
Depends.
It depends.
So it really kind of depends. So we sort of defer, to be honest with you, to you to decide. We like projects that show partnerships and collaboration. And so if let's say the prisons were looking for some particular improvement, there are 9 prisons, right? We'd rather not have an application from each of the 9 prisons. We'd like either one of the prisons to apply on behalf of all 9, or we'd like DOC central office to apply for one. With most of our grants, what we tell you is each project requires a separate grant application. So if one institution was asking for some security improvement and another was asking for drug detection services and another one was asking for something else, those would be really different separate projects, and those would be individual grants. And we wouldn't care if they came from the department, all of them from the Department of Corrections or individually by. Now, sometimes we will specify, and it will be in the RFP. So again, read the RFP. Sometimes we'll tell you, we only want 1 grant per county, or we only want 1 grant per agency. And so if that's the case, then you really do have to collaborate on it. But generally speaking, what I talked about makes sense. And that's the approach we take. And you can always call and ask, what would you do? And I'll give you the best advice.
And
on that
honestly,
case.
alignment might have thrown a different twist on that.
Yeah.
So you might want to talk to some other people at DOC before you go and write a grant, just in case. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Dennis, you know me, I haven't really done anything so far. But I did a lot of looking around, poking around, and being from where we're at, I see a lot of things that point to, they address violent crime. I don't think we have any violent crime. I mean, we have crimes that everybody else has, we just don't have them so much. So, what's a violent crime?
Okay, the question is, what is a violent crime?
Yeah.
There are a list somewhere. There's a list. Murder, sexual assault, robbery, I think.
Those
Anybody
are
else?
the part 1 crimes.
Is that in code?
Yeah.
It's
What's
in
in
code. I don't
yeah.
know.
So, but you're really interested in, what do you consider a violent crime for a grant program?
Yes.
And frankly, we don't get down into the weeds to define everything that would be a violent crime. We think it's primarily self-evident, if it's a violent crime, and if it's a violent crime in your community, if it's a problem in your community, it doesn't have to be murder, it doesn't have to be rape, doesn't have to be robbery, but if it's, well, I think you're going to have a hard time so the question was, what happens if it happens twice, if you only have 2? I don't think it's worth your time and effort to write a grant for something that happens twice a year. And honestly, if you called me and you told me that, first thing I'm going to ask is, well, how many, you say, hey, I'm going to write a grant for violent crime, and I'm going to say to you, well, Decatur County, how many violent crimes do you have? And when you say 2, then I'm going to say, let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, because Sioux City's going to write a grant, and they've got, I don't know, 1,000 of them, right? Yeah.
That goes to Lori's problem statement. Well, what's your problem? And is violent crime may not be your problem.
No.
So,
I just
Good.
also chime in from a data perspective. Violent crime is considered any crime against a person. So the offense level doesn't matter. It could be a simple assault even, but again, it's how much you've got of it. And is simple assault really what you're necessarily looking to fund, a particular program on? But if you think about it in terms of an offense against a person.
No, it sounds like a silly question.
any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, as a grant reviewer, would you rather read a story or would you rather just have facts?
As a grant reviewer, would you rather have a story or would you rather have facts?
Yeah,
I think we want both. At least I do. I don't know about everybody else, but we want you to show the numbers. Like, do you have a violent crime problem? Well, you're going to tell us, here's the data that shows our problem. And here's a few anecdotes. Here's a few cases we've had. Here's something that we can read about to tell us to tell us the story.
Because not every reviewer is a data analyst.
Yeah.
Right, either.
Yep.
So you need both.
And that went to a question earlier too. Well, do you want to tailor your application to a specific reviewer, right? Does this reviewer know law enforcement terms or this, I don't think any of that's really necessary as long as you're telling the story and being really clear about it.
What we basically want to know is, what is your problem? What's the level of your problem? And what's your ability to address the problem? So just in a nutshell, what's your problem and how are you capable of addressing it? So, I mean, broadly, that's what we always want to know.
And can I add, don't use acronyms?
Yes, spell them out.
Yeah, we fund a lot of the same people over and over, and they'll just talk like they know, we know what they're talking about, which sometimes we do, but our grant reviewers might not. And so you really have to talk as if the person reviewing your grant does not know anything about who you are or what you do. You have to remove that level of familiarity of, and don't use acronyms.
And if you're submitting for technology, Sioux City, tell us what the technology does. We had a grant application, and I'm kidding, Sioux City, but they asked for augmented reality and virtual reality, and not a single one of us reviewers knew what the hell they were talking about, and they didn't tell us. And so if you're talking about technology, be sure to tell us. Even if you're talking about a server, tell us why you need a server. I mean, we generally know what servers do, but why do you need a server if you're putting cameras up, right? So make sure you, especially in technology where the reviewers are very likely not techie people, make sure that you describe all of that detail for them.
Yes.
No question, but a comment. I just wanted to tell you guys, thank you for the presentation today. It was really good. Now I like how good I feel like I want to go out and write a good grant that will motivate, that will be exciting for all of you guys. I feel like,
Well, we're
Brett, I
looking
got a
forward to
sidebar
it.
for you.
Thanks. We want to
We
give the money
appreciate
away.
that. Yeah, we do. Yeah, like we
Definitely, I
said a
feel
couple
like-
times.
I feel like that the how to do it better clearly came through today. So that was really, I think that's what you were going for. I think that came across real well. So
Great, thank you.
I have a question for Brent that's just out there, unless it has nothing to do with grants.
Okay.
Is your office concerned with self-driving cars and how that's all?
I'm gonna sit down.
Yeah.
Look at them all scattered.
Yeah, is our office concerned about self-driving cars? From what I know from visiting with the University of Iowa, their advanced driving simulator, I think they changed their name, whatever. All of that is being oversold, that they're driver assist. And it's going to be quite some time before they're not driver assist. And so all of that is really being, I think, and I'm not saying that myself, I'm kind of repeating what Dan McGehee from the University of Iowa has told us, and they're one of the few automated driving tracks or facilities, research centers in the country. Everything that you're seeing on TV and the news and all that is really being oversold. Now, there are people outside of our office that are really looking that far ahead, but we're really not. We're looking at driver behavior, and I think everything that I'm hearing today, I feel like, gosh, what we do is we're pretty simple. But it's really just the drivers. Have them make better decisions. Our roadways are getting safer because of all that technology, but then as far as distracted driving, it's creating some of the problems also.
I actually have an ask. So no. If you found this useful or if you found it irritating, let Susie know. Susie's information is right here. And we really do want to know, because we're thinking about maybe doing this again. And so it'd be nice to know what we should do different or better. And then also, I would love to know if you, based on what you learned if you make a grant application to the feds in particular, we talk to each other a little bit and we'd know if this was impactful in the grants that we administer, but we won't know if you make an application to the feds and if you're successful. And I especially like to know, I really sold the Bulletproof Vest program. If you apply and then don't get money, I look silly, but my understanding is we're doing really well in that program. Everybody who's applying is getting something. So anyway, that's, if you think of it, circle back to us in 9 months and tell us that you were successful or not successful, or, just be nice to know. Susie, I'll let you close.
Before you close out, can I poll the audience?
Sure. We're gonna.
If somebody's not wearing their seatbelt, would you say that they're unbuckled or unbelted? Unbuckled?
Yes, unbuckled.
Unbuckled or unbelted?
Delta to me sounds like.
If you had to pick one. Unbuckled. Okay, thanks.
Stacy, I think we may have a question online. Stacy, did you want to ask a question? Muted. Oh. That we just had a comment. Very interesting and helpful for me to learn some of the lingo, as this is a newer task for me. If you have any questions, any acronyms or anything that you don't understand, let us know. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Thank you, everyone, again for being here. We really appreciate it.